look, I'm here to talk about, this is something like, I can talk here about it. I can go up to the House Armed Services Committee, House Commerce Committee. I can go to the Senate ones. I give this exact same talk to these places because this is absolutely a serious national security issue for us. When I studied, in my background, after that good introduction, I'll just say I got a whole military background behind that. I was head of our operations in the Indo-Pacific for all the different services for about 3 years. So ran the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines around, but more importantly, wrote our war plans. So I'm often called back to talk about, look at war planning, do war gaming. And I took a look, and just to give you a really broad picture, I take a look at two types of scenarios. One's called most dangerous. That's where you hear about like a cross-strait invasion of Taiwan and all kinds of things going on. And one's called most likely, which is where China runs a cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign against Taiwan and its supporters, definitely the United States, potentially Japan and Australia. Why does that matter? Because in either case, they're going to do a very aggressive cyber and influence operation campaign against the United States. And here, I'll tell you right off the bat, if you haven't heard that, if you haven't figured out in the 4 hours here or in the 20 years you've all been studying this issue, we are an insanely vulnerable target. Like when I was a targeteer in the way back in my career, I'd have been like, attacking America is the easiest target in the world in critical infrastructure because we are highly networked and highly insecure. And we have a deep aversion to regulation that might possibly fix it. So we're really in this position where we're vulnerable. And then you say to yourself, yeah, but Mark, I get it, we're vulnerable. But how do you know the Chinese are going to take advantage of this? And I knew they were taking advantage of it, but all of us got to know they were taking advantage of it last January when Director Wray came out and said they're taking advantage of it. And it became known as Volt Typhoon, which is I like it because it gives it a name. I don't like it because it's not descriptive. That is the name of that is a nickname of an advanced persistent threat team. I promise you, if there's only one advanced persistent threat team working this issue from China, Chairman Xi is going to have to kill a few more generals, right? Because he should have, and he does have multiple advanced persistent threat teams working on U.S. critical infrastructure. Any war game I play, the resilience of our systems, the resilience of our society collapses fairly rapidly without water, power. I can give you can pick from this choice. Just one's enough, but pick from any of them: water, power, ports, aviation, rail, healthcare, finances. Pick any one of them, we're in a lot of trouble. Pick all 8, we're screwed. China's picked all 8, all right? And they've gone after them. We've acknowledged this. Volt Typhoon does this weird thing where it says they were in Guam, they're in Hawaii, on the West Coast. China's got a map. They know where the Midwest is. They know where the East Coast is. I promise you, they're all over. I just think the FBI held back some of the information they knew for whatever purposes. So they take a look at that. So I'm going to take a look at it from the defensive point of view. And if I'm going to sell this to Congress, telling them that public health and safety is at risk, it will get me like, there'll be like a little golf clap in a corner, zero action. If I tell them economic prosperity is at risk, they'll get a golf clap, and there's no committee that runs economic prosperity. But if I tell them national security is at risk, now you got their attention. Is that right? No. Is that the way Congress works? Yes. So that's what I do. And what I say is, hey, look, first, America's mobility relies on civilian infrastructure. You know this in your head. You know that the Army doesn't own rail networks everywhere. You know that the Air Force doesn't have 100 major airfields across the United States. You know that the government doesn't, the Navy doesn't run 19 ports. The reality is we rely on civilian critical infrastructure. I'll tell you one cool story. Like, what percentage? Everybody know what percentage of our civilian infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector? 85%. Do you know where we got that number? Dick Clark made it up. And we're sitting there, and he goes, "What do you think?" And I'm saying a number. A guy named John Tritek saying a number. There's like 3 of us, 4 of us in the office, and I'm the least capable. I was brought in there in the Hunt bin Laden part of our directorate in the NSC, so I'm not trusted at all. I think I was like 82%. I just pulled something out of my ass. He goes, "I think it's 85. Now, I will tell you, We then spent a year and a half mathematically proving it was pretty damn close to 85. Now, it depends if you count, in that number, you need to count state and local, non-federal government entities like state and local governments, because most of us know that a lot of things like water and rural health care are not actually private sector. They are poorer than private sector. They're called state and local utilities. They're the two wood nickels club. That's why I say they don't have two wood nickels to rub together. They are the perfect target because they only have two wood nickels to rub together, which means they have taken delayed actions. That means they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. That means that when you hear it takes 69 days to install a Microsoft patch, I don't think that's at like Chase, right? I don't think that's at like Goldman. I think that's at like Farquhar County Rural Water, where 69 days would be a win. You know what I mean? I always pick on Farquhar County. I hope I never meet their IT administrator. And look, active threats. Just in case the Chinese weren't road mapping shit, the criminal actors are out there road mapping these now, right? We all understand, this group understands data is money. You know, data is a criminal opportunity, and they're out there mapping it for ransomware purposes. Just to make it really clear, the infrastructure sucks on its own. The modern, particularly now here I'm talking about aviation, rail, and ports. Our aviation system, I think most of you remember 18 months ago, they did a minor, software upgrade to the air traffic control system. Then they had to call in Fred, the guy who retired 9 years before, to unscrew the software, how the software patch was put in to a system that was no longer supported by software, right? By non-proprietary software. There's something called a next-gen FAA. I'm going to talk about it. There's a bunch of programs going on to modernize. The only thing I'll say on, they look like an Army, like a U.S. Army procurement program. It's always 2 years away from being 2 years away. And that's where our modernization of our aviation system has been for over a decade. And then finally, I'm going to try to get some policy recommendations. And if I become incoherent at any point during this talk, this whole there's a paper on this on the FDD website on military mobility. And then under rail, aviation, and ports, there's sub-papers that go into detail that I find boring, and I enjoy this topic. This is important because I have to have boring research papers when you go up to the Hill and say, here's a 25-page boring research paper. The congressman's like, oh, I'll read it tonight, Mark, put it right down. And I say, here's the one-page summary. He's like, oh, that's good. And then I say, and here's the written legislation to get it done. And then they go, now I'm really happy because I could submit some legislation, which is how they measure success. So we rely on critical infrastructure. I'm going to prove the 85% for real in transportation. So this is pretty cool. Like when you go to a military base, let's say I got to get a tank from Fort Kavasi. I guess it got renamed yesterday, Fort Hood again, I guess. I don't know what you call it. The big base in Texas where all our armor is. And we got to get that to a fight in the Baltics or in Korea. It gets on a train. We have special train cars that take tanks. You lift it onto there, you drives it on, and it hooks in, and you're on that base. And you'll love this, Josh. There's 2 power systems, although the cattle battery backup is from China. I'd be careful with that one. 2 comm systems, 2 water systems. It's the fucking Noah's Ark of critical infrastructure, 2 of everything, right? You're secure. You get the train starts to pull out. And DOD, they're not insensitive. They've made sure the first kilometer or 2 outside the base is still DOD. We're fine. And then you don't hit like Norfolk Southern. Like you think, oh, there's 6 major rail companies in America. You got to hit one, they're rich, they got to be okay. They're not, by the way, but they're going to be okay. No, you hit like Fred's Rural Rail Collective number 73, and he owns a stretch of 9 miles of our 80,000 miles of rail network in America, 100,000 miles of rail network in America. Fred does not know what network is running on his system. Fred does not know what an IT administrator, he certainly has never heard of the word CISO, maybe not IT administrator. In fact, Fred's like, I'm not sure there's any computer shit running on and you're like, yes, there is. There's green means go, red means stop. That signal's getting there somehow. It used to be RF, it's now cyber. It's now a signal, a wired in signal. So Fred has not spent any money on cybersecurity. So if you're the Chinese, are you going to attack Noah's Ark, Are you going to wait 7 kilometers outside the base, what I call Mad Max Thunderdome of cybersecurity, and attack? Of course you're going to attack. And here's the beauty. How many rail lines do you think are coming out of the base? One. It spreads out after Fred's. When you get to Ethel and Jane's, you know, they're rural collectors, and starts to spread to go different ways. I'm going to jam every rail car in coming out of Fort Hood at that one spot. Okay. You would say to yourself, well, DOD will take care of that. No, DOD is like, holy shit, we're not taking care of that, because we have gone around and actually mapped the rail system, and we consider 40,000 miles of the rail system what's called STRACnet, the Strategic Rail Network of the United States. And DOD exactly provides this much funding to the 40,000 miles of the United States, upon which it is completely required. All the Transcom war plans utilize this 40,000 miles. Transcom being the U.S. combatant command that moves all this shit in wartime. No one in the DOD is out there making sure it's okay. They run an exercise once a year, it goes great. I'm pretty sure the Chinese are like, do not run anything during their exercise. Why tip them off? Okay. So there's the trail, 40,000 miles of STRACnet. 90% of our stuff moves by sea, so that's 19 seaports. So I thought all our shit went out of Oakland and Charleston, the 2 military government-owned sea lift ports. I was, of course, 100% wrong. Transcom says there's 19. Why jam our asses up? Let's go for all, you know, that we use, depending on the war plan, depending on the adversary, we use a certain number. So that's another good place. And I will say this, everyone's like, it's the cranes. Well, yeah, first of all, I love that the Biden administration took cranes seriously. I hate where they ended up. They're like, you know, we're going to give, they wrote an executive order, which was full of all kinds of guidance with no money, like all executive orders. So it was what I would call worthless. But on top of it, well, I'm going to have to watch my time here. I'll go way over if I'm not careful. They also said, like, we got to replace the crane. No. And they said you could dip into the $20 billion worth of, because there's about 100 cranes at these ports. These are whammy-dime cranes. These are expensive $100 million cranes. They like are totally automated. They're using a PNT GPS signal. It says you're right here. Sea airline container 2357's right there. Reach out, pick it up. Now look, there are humans in this because there's a union involved, but this is all being done automated. It lifts it up. Now some dudes do check the safety straps. I get that part. And then it goes, place it in slot 2344 of ship 2721 at this pier. And it goes over and it drops it in there. It's just fully automated. You do not need to replace the crane. The fact that the cranes are made in China is tough. But what you do need to do is replace the brains of the crane with US software or Western software, and Japan builds cranes. That is, because these cranes, what we found was they were getting reasonably frequently automated updates for good purposes, maintenance purposes and efficiency purposes, but also feeding back what they saw and did. I would say that's a little less reasonable. And no one knew that second part was happening. You know, we got to fix that. That's not a $98 million per crane problem. That's a $98,000 per crane problem. Very fixable. We have not yet fixed it because we were admiring the $98 million program plan, and most of us were going, that is not the right answer to this question. But, you know, now I think we'll see what happens, what Congress does. By the way, Congress has teed up a Fix the Cranes Act 3 years in a row, and they have failed 3 years in a row. Because I'm going to talk about why that happens in a second. And then just the 69 airports are interesting. Like you think, oh, we got all these Air Force bases. That's where we're going to do this from. No. A lot of this lift, the people, the equipment is going to fly out of like commercial airports, don't worry, not O'Hare and Atlanta Hartsfield. You're not going to be delayed in your flying just because we're at war. You can still fly around. But like Columbus Airport, I went to Columbus Airport. I do not know that it's in this program. It's in the program. Because when I landed there, I'm like, fuck, there's like 6 active. You look up, the whole screen for the day is on one screen. All the flights are like, it's like a, you know. But then you look and there's like, I'm at gate 84. I'm like, mother in heaven. You know, what it is they have when you find an airport with tons of gates, but only 6 or 8 being used, someone is working with that with that organization to keep them on the, and there is a little bit of money in that, in the strategic airports thing. No cybersecurity standards, but money. So, you know, we're using these. So this is how things are going. I don't even know. It's a hidden dependency if you choose to not look. I would describe the Department of Defense. And are they a target? Yeah, and this is just things I've already said. CIS has found vulnerabilities in the ACAS system. There are lots of cyber vulnerabilities in our FAA run systems. And then aviation is really tough because you have FAA and TSA. Now, TSA, most of us believe TSA is the person that gropes you inappropriately at the airport. That is a small portion of the work they do, right? They also run cybersecurity in aviation and in rail and in pipelines. And thank God they had Dave Pekoski running the place. Because everything I would say coming off of this would be, and it's even worse. But I think Dave was a very good administrator for the last 6 years till he was abruptly fired on January 21st for no good reason. So you can see that there's I talked about the ports already. And then here's a shocker, our rail system's ancient, okay. And this just says that they don't do a very good job updating their software and things. So then you get it, how do you fix this? Okay, this is where it gets really hard. The Department of Defense is like, we know we need this fixed. And what they say to me when I talk to them is like, please don't say this in public. So I'm gonna say it in public. I've said it in public already. They don't have this discussion. I mean, it's not like the Chinese don't know. We now publicly say the Chinese know. We all know this is a vulnerability. What DOD is afraid of is DOD, when they walk down like they have an agency meeting, they're walking down the corridor to get a soda pop, DOD's like dropping 100 million left and right out of their pockets. Because they're like daddy war bucks of federal agencies, right? $893 billion budget. The whole rest of the government is this year going to come in underneath DOD. Usually they're slightly larger, but this year they're going to come in underneath. So they're like, shit, can't you just give us some of your pocket lint? You know, just a little bit of dough here to fix this problem. So DOD does not, they believe, and they are correct. The minute they own an inch of this problem, they're going to own a mile of it. So they're like, do not include us in this discussion. They don't even like it when I write shit like, do a tabletop exercise for how it's going outside your base. They're like, we do not want to have that report sent to Congress because it's going to say, if it's run fairly, it's a dumpster fire outside the base. And they don't want Congress to read, it's a dumpster fire because then Congress goes, well, we ordered a report. They did it. The report says it's a dumpster fire. None of the choices to move forward are do nothing, right? You know, so they're going to have to take action. So DOD is not happy with that. The next problem is what committees get shit done in Congress? Number one, armed services. Number two, armed services on the behalf of another, the Intelligence Committee. And number three, armed services on behalf of Senate the Foreign Relations Committees. Those are the top three. Now, once every 4 years, the guys who do the farm bill come cruising into play and they knock out the farm bill. And then once every maybe 6 years, the the transportation bill, infrastructure bill comes around a corner and it gets done. Those are the regular, and there's appropriations bills at the end of every year, depending how people are feeling, you can throw a little policy in the back called ash and trash. It's got to not be hated, right? To get into that. It's got to be like, America supports baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, we'll put that in. Or we're going to name this new post office in New Hampshire after Josh Corman. That's it, right? You know, so they got that kind of shit in there, but not really like, hey, let's do the Water Risk and Resilience Organization and throw it in the back of the ash and trash. That's very hard. The only ash and trash I've ever seen that had serious policy in it was called Circea. So I don't know how that happened, but probably that was a swing and a miss. But so my point on this is you've got to get the committees of concern to give a damn, write their bill, and then what's called in a floor amendment, put it in the NDAA and do the exact same thing in the Senate, almost word for word. And when they conference it, they'll have to go, oh shit, it's in both versions, almost word for word, we'll make it go. They could still knock it out. I've seen that 25% of the time. No. We both think we should do this, so let's, okay, we won't do it. And it's done by staffers, by the way. Now, members are not sitting there for that discussion. So I've made some recommendations, and here's the other thing that blows my mind. So I've mentioned 2, maybe 3 sector risk management agencies here. 10 minutes? Okay, I'll go 5 more and then questions. Coast Guard, TSA, and FAA. Now let me just say, over on the side here are my other donkey collection. EPA, agriculture, education. In fact, I won't be mean to TSA. They're not donkey. They're like whatever's one above a donkey, like a really small pony, right? They are, but when we think of our 13 agencies that serve as sector risk management agencies, there's a handful that do a good job and they're properly resourced to do a good job, or they do an average job and they're properly resourced to do a good job. Some underperform. And then there's everyone else. There's a couple what I'd call Bs, maybe like a gentleman's C, kind of thing. And then there's the Ds and Fs. Our sector risk management agencies have to be properly funded. So what I recommend, almost all of these, if you read it, they're written slightly different so that congressmen think they're different, 13 different recommendations. But the vast majority of this are fund the Coast Guard properly as an SRMA. From what I can tell, the Coast Guard gets under $5 million to be an SRMA. They own ports and they own elements of chemicals and other SRMAs. And they own the rest of maritime, which is, locks and other things, and a few other rivers and other things that they have to do. And we give them 1/20th of what we get the Department of Energy. For the purposes of this, by the way, water, I'll just tell you, used to get, I thought, about 8.5 million. I would say that's also taken a hit in the last, 3 months. It's going to be a smaller number, not near enough. Even Department of Energy, which was the gold standard at 205 million, got dropped to 175 because, the cyber problem is getting less in our energy grid. That's how I read things. But we've got to, all of these, we got to get TSA and Coast Guard properly funded for this. We also have to get proper assessments of what DoD really needs and what they require from these groups to get the resiliency right. There's just simple things like StracNet was somehow outside the resiliency annex for Transcom. I mean, I would just gently say almost nothing is, all the military stuff moves by rail, the heavy stuff. There's no other, we're not putting, our roads aren't made for M1A1s and Bradleys and Strykers, so they have to get on rail. So we desperately need rail for any kind of Army movement. Simple things like U.S. Coast Guard captains of the port are supposed to have a cyber specialist working for them. They've just been funding it out of Hyde. These are simple things that you go there. Some of these are simple, some are harder. And then at one point, when you're really just done and tired and full of the bullshit, you ask GAO to go study it, right? Because GAO just rips them a new one. The only problem is in cybersecurity, every GAO report reads the same. So after a while, everyone's just like, it's like you're desensitized, when I've beaten my sailors 50 days in a row, by day 51, they're like, shit, we're getting beaten. Who cares, right? There's a serious problem. We never beat our sailors in the Navy as a joke, but there's a serious problem. But I still consider GAO a value because there are some congressmen who will run with a GAO report to fix things. One other one I want to mention is overarching all of this: the cranes, the trains, the planes, the shit that moves around on the airfield is GPS. I spent a lot of time in Ukraine and in Israel. The GPS spoofing is an art now. Most of the time I was anywhere I go forward, like near Dnipro, it tells me I'm at the Kiev airport. Anytime I'm near Golan, it tells me I'm at Beirut airport. Anytime I'm near the southern part of Gaza, it tells me I'm in Beirut airport. I'm in that case, the Cairo airport. And that's done to trick drones into landing. Some drones have a software written in that says when near an airfield, land for aviation safety purposes. The jamming is brutal on the front line. I mean, the reason they did Operation Spiderweb was to get around like curtains of jamming curtains that are set all over Russia. They defeated it by driving these trucks past the curtains and then launching from inside the inner ring on these air bases. So jamming is really important. Why does this matter? Because there is a new, our phones, I don't have mine with me, the antenna, my system runs on an L1 antenna. It should be you would hope it's off a US GPS. I've set it up so I can see about 20% of the time mine is running on Galileo, which is a European system. About 10% of the time it's running on GLONASS, which is a Russian system. But again, it's because our GPS system has become weak. Our L1 frequency is running on 30-year-old satellites, been up there a long time. We've launched, believe it or not, enough satellites for the new L5 system. It was supposed to be done 5 years ago. We finally completed it 3 months ago with a lot of congressional slap in the back, to get it moving, to launch the 18th and 19th satellites. You need 18 for anything but flight safety, 21 of these, what are called GPS 2F and 3 satellites up. And so you're like, fuck, we got them all launched. We're good to go. No, we're not good to go. We're not good to go because the operational control system isn't 5 years behind, it's 6 years behind. And we think Raytheon's going to fix it this September. So we got to get that done. So from my perspective, we've got to get, we got to get that OCX system done. And then we got to get our infrastructure looking about how do you switch over to the L5 antenna and L5 antenna receiving system, or how do you get more other resilient things? There's something called ELORAN, there's others. I'm agnostic on how you do it, but you better get yourself on an alternate Jeep. You better have a resilient, redundant GPS system if you want these cranes, trains, planes, Abraham's good, to all be working at the same time. Because if we're going to get our stuff, our military stuff, from forts to ports to overseas, we're going to have to really focus, do these 12 or 13 recommendations. And I don't believe in 2027. I mean, I think for the purposes of this discussion, I should say I believe the attack might come in 2027. I think it's more 2029, 2030. But the speed at which these agencies and these industries fix things, you need to pass the laws and provide the money now. And there's a small chance you'll be ready. And by the way, each of these is underpinned by, I mean, Josh can do some 10 ways to connect it, is underpinned by water, it's underpinned by power, it's underpinned by a healthcare system that works. So all those other things have to work. I'm just telling you the way you sell it is national security. And then you can get Congress moving. And once Congress gets moving, eventually the executive branch. The executive branch do ignore law, but not forever, right? They eventually come around and do the law. There's one or two minor exceptions to that, but in the 999 out of 1,000 times, they'll eventually follow the law. So that said, that's what I think it's critical that we frame this critical infrastructure challenge as a military mobility challenge to get the Congress focused on the national security elements of it, and then hopefully get the money in there so that we can get the right standards. And then, of course, you've got to have, like I said, power, water, and others running simultaneously. All right, did I save 3 or 4 minutes for questions? It's usually a perfect brief, but if I miss something, no, I'm joking. Any questions on anything? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I'll be here tomorrow, talking tomorrow morning. But no, this is, to me, please go on the FTD website, pull it down, take a look. While you're there, you can look at we have a collection of the miscreant critical infrastructures, water, rural electrical, a few farms coming up. Yes, Nick.
Mark, I thought we were pushing this all down to the states.
Yeah, that's. So we're pushing this issue down to the states, says Nick Lisserson. Isn't that make sure it's fixed? Of course not. Look, if there's someone more broken than financially broken than TSA and the Coast Guard, it would be the state and local authorities to handle this. Yes, sir.
So whenever I've heard presentations like this, the question always seems to come up. It's like, well, why haven't we been attacked in this way before? It seems like the answer is that, well, because everybody's invested here. So they have a stake in the U.S. economy functioning, and because we've got nukes. But what are the military planners?
Yeah, the reason this hasn't, from a nation state, hasn't happened is because this is an act of war, and you're saving it for when you need an act of war. Now, look, do I think they'll do portions of this and elements short of war, like during a crisis buildup to send signals like, America, if you weren't 100% sure that we have you tattooed, I think you'll get some of it then, but the real stuff will come during wartime. And it'll happen in Japan, it'll happen to Korea, it'll happen to Taiwan, it'll happen to all. By the way, all of Europe is like this. I'll just say I tried to do this brief for NATO. Here's the problem with NATO. Like here, at least, I have to convince one Congress there's a problem. And NATO, if I said, tell me your 32 most important critical infrastructure problems for military mobility, they would bring me one from France, one from UK, one from Poland, one from Malta, one from Portugal. That's not your top 32 problems. Your top 32 problems are probably all in the Netherlands, Germany, Poland, Belgium. There's a track in there that's how you do military mobility for a fight. And so I'm very worried that even when we fix this here, we have to make sure, this is why you do have to help your international partners, why the administration's rampant desire to quash any kind of overseas assistance is a mistake, is that we need Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines. Now, Japan can pay for their own, they just need technical advice. But the Philippines cannot pay for their own. If we want our weapon systems to be firing from Philippines, we probably want to make sure there's a power grid working in the Philippines. Yep. Last one. Yeah, thanks.
What's your white paper?
So it's on FDD. It's probably called .org. Oh, there it is. FDD.org. And it's probably called military mobility and some other words. All right. Thanks. Hey, thank you very much, Josh. I appreciate it.